Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to talk about the Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Link is in the description below. We, of course, do have several different tiers available, and you can lock in that rate. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, you guys know I'm a huge proponent of the Bitcoin dominance going to much higher levels. And despite frequent calls throughout the cryptoverse of the dominance going lower and for the altcoin market to overtake it, that's just simply not been the case. And we have continued to see the dominance of Bitcoin slowly march higher, 1 month after another. Now, I sort of promised myself the last time I made a video on Bitcoin dominance that I wouldn't try to talk about it as frequently. But what I tried to do is I tried to sort of set myself milestones. Okay, when it reaches this next level, then I'll talk about it again because it's at least made some progress. And one of the milestones for it that I wanted to see the dominance hit is actually not 45% on the stablecoin or on the dominance that includes stablecoins, but it's actually on the dominance that excludes stablecoins getting back to 50%. So we're going to talk more about that later on in the video. So in this video, we're first going to talk about the dominance including stablecoins, then we're going to talk about the dominance excluding stablecoins, and then we're going to talk about the blue chip dominance, which I believe is something we mentioned in the last video, and we're going to follow up with this time as well. And if you're not familiar with what the blue chip dominance is, it is Bitcoin dominance plus Ethereum dominance. Because counter to what some people might believe, I actually do think Ethereum is a blue chip. I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are the blue chips. Now, the reason why we spend so much time talking about the dominance is because you want to make sure that you protect the satoshi value of your portfolio. A lot of cryptocurrency tracking apps or whatever you might be using have the ability to sort of see what the value of your portfolio is, not only in US dollars, but also based in Bitcoin. And if you click on that and you're very heavy altcoins, there's a good chance you've been slowly bleeding those altcoins, the altcoin valuations back to Bitcoin over the last 12 to 15 months. Now, there are always a few altcoins that outperform, and if you are heavy in those altcoins that have, congratulations. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I will often admit that during every cycle that during every phase of this cycle, there's always a few altcoins that do outperform. It's just really hard to know which ones those are going to be. And so for my purposes, I just stick with Bitcoin during this phase of the cycle. Now, what I want to do here is we want to go through systematically what's been happening with the Bitcoin dominance. So you can see we actually talked back in July and August going into the Ethereum merge that we would likely see it turn back around in September, which we did. Now, just to sort of make sure that I'm keeping myself in check, this move here was not a move I anticipated, so I'm fine saying that. It's clear I was not anticipating this move by the dominance back to the downside. I really did think that this was just sort of the breakout to much higher valuations on the Bitcoin dominance, but we ended up coming back down. And once it became more apparent to me that that we were going to rally into the merge, I figured that, okay, well, after we get past September, we should likely see the dominance turn back around. And it's not just because of what was going on with Ethereum, but also it just happens to be that September is a month oftentimes where you will see the dominance sort of go in the direction, the reverse of the direction that was going in leading into September. For instance, if you look here at September of 2022, we talked about how we'll likely reverse course on the dominance, will start going back up. You can see it was the case, but it was also the case back in 2021 as well, right? And it was also the case back in 2020, right? And so on and so forth. So you could continue going back, and it's not always that it's going down and then it reverses course to going back up to the upside. There's also examples where it's going up into September, and then September sort of acts as a way to get the dominance to come back down. So I want to be clear. I'm not expecting the dominance to go up to 70-75%, including stables, but I do actually think it can go much higher than where it is now. And I know it sounds crazy, but I would not be surprised to ultimately see it hit 60% at the peak of the next bull market, or near the peak of the next bull market. Okay. It could hit it before then, right? It could hit it well before then as well. But I do think that that is a very likely outcome, although it might not sound like it at this time. Though it certainly does seem a bit more reasonable today than it did just a few months ago when, when there was these, a lot of people were worried about it sort of breaking down to new lows. Now, one of the things that you might consider with the Bitcoin dominance and why do we follow it? Because if you think about it, it's not something that you can really trade, right? I mean, yes, theoretically, you can trade alt Bitcoin pairs with the expectation that the dominance is going to go higher and therefore alt Bitcoin pairs should bleed. But that doesn't always work because there's always some altcoins that outperform, right? So it's not like you can necessarily take that to the bank anyways. But again, the point is to say, look, you want to preserve the satoshi value of your portfolio during this phase of the cycle. Because what happens is the altcoin market as a whole just gets systematically chopped up. They get chewed up and spit out, and Bitcoin can do this whether the price goes up or down, right? So for instance, recently we saw the price of Bitcoin rally back up this week, right? It sort of tagged this trend line here. We'll talk a little bit more about price later on in the video, but it sort of tagged this trend line here, rallied on back up, and the dominance has continued to push higher. But if you think about this, the dominance, remember that the shift in the trend was in September. But since September, the price of the valuation of Bitcoin has gone up, and then it went down, and then it went sideways, and then it went up, and then it sort of has gone sideways for a while. And recently, of course, it's had a pump up. But the reality of the situation is what, right? It's gone down, up, and sideways. And while you could sort of pinpoint any specific move and say, well, this happened on this day, the reality of the situation is that no matter what it did, the dominance continued to slowly trend higher, right? Despite everything. Despite the calls for altcoins taking over, despite for the calls of Ethereum flipping Bitcoin, which I'm not saying it can't ever happen. I don't think it's a likely outcome anytime soon. Despite all that, right, we see the dominance continue to go higher. Now, I want to hone in here a little bit more on why this is an important metric. One thing to consider, and I know this can hit kind of hard if you're not familiar with this, but it is a sobering reality. I mean, it's a reality, and it's quite sobering to realize it. But a lot of altcoins that you hold near and dear to your heart, that you think are the best thing in the world, and that you think will go put in new all-time highs one day, a lot of them won't. Okay. Now, some of them could, and I think some of them probably will. And even last cycle, I was thinking I was using my own money, putting my money where my mouth was, and actually putting my own money in some altcoins that I thought would see new all-time highs. And they did, right? We saw Cardano go to new all-time highs. We saw Chainlink go to new all-time highs, and so on and so forth. But be that as it may, right, the other side of it is don't marry an altcoin. And when you get into the phase of the bear market year and the recovery year, the dominance tends to go higher. And you don't know necessarily which coins are going to survive this brutal process. Let me show you what I mean. If we were to take a trip in time back to 2013, it was quite a simpler time in the Cryptoverse. This is a snapshot on CoinMarketCap from June 9th of 2013. And if you were to take a look at the top 10, you'll notice that Bitcoin is number 1, Litecoin is number 2, Namecoin, Peercoin, Novacoin, Feathercoin, Terracoin, Devcoin, Freecoin. See, what are these? My favorite, of course, a memory from long ago, is BBQ coin. And I happened to notice that this one really started to rally as we got closer, to around that July 4th time frame. But again, BBQ coin. What a simpler time in the Cryptoverse. The point is, do any of you recognize half of these? Right? I don't even remember all of them, to be completely honest. But I definitely remember some of them coming and going. I mean, they're constantly coming and going. There's also MadeSafe Coin and WorldCoin. You can see WorldCoin down here. There's so many different coins, right? And back then, of course, I don't think they were nearly as serious as projects today. So you could argue that they had a lot less staying power than some of the projects today. But again, be that as it may, you don't recognize a lot of them. But what do you recognize, right? Bitcoin's number one, right? Bitcoin's number one. If you were to continue on and fast forward into, say, the next bull market, let's go to 2017. Let's go to June of 2017 and see what's what. You have Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, Ethereum, I think, is a blue chip. Look at this. It's been around. It's been number two for a long time. Which also, I mean, it did sort of flip flop with XRP a little bit, but you have Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and then so on and so forth. And a lot of these you won't recognize. Okay, there's a lot of people that joined crypto in 2021 that might not recognize a lot of these. Okay, you might not recognize. And I'm not going to go through every single one, but you can take a look at the screen and go through every single coin and say, hey, this is what the top 10 look like. And there's a lot now there's a lot in the top 10 then. They're not in the top 10 anymore. You don't even recognize them. Okay, you continue on into 2021, right? Let's go to 2021 and let's go to April of 2021. You see Bitcoin and ETH. You also see BNB. And then you have XRP, Tether, Cardano, Polkadot, Uniswap, Litecoin, Chainlink, and so on and so forth. So again, what do we notice? The point here is to say, every time you fast forward another cycle, what's number one, right? You have Bitcoin number one, you have Ethereum number two. And the altcoin market, it comes and goes. And I mean, again, I know everyone likes their altcoin and whatever, but at the end of the day, they can come and go. And again, it took me a long time to realize that myself. And the sooner I realized that, I was much better off because I was much more capable of preserving the satoshi value of my portfolio during the recovery or during the bear market year and during the recovery year than I really ever was before that, because I would just keep throwing money into the altcoin market. And while sometimes the USD valuations would go up and I would feel like a genius, I would then check my Bitcoin, the Bitcoin valuation of my portfolio and say, well, before it was worth X Bitcoin and now it's worth 1/2 X Bitcoin. So maybe I was smart in terms of the USD valuation of my portfolio went up, but if I had just put my money in Bitcoin during that time, like it would have been worth twice as much. Because we also know that Bitcoin can often lead the early stages of the next bull market, right? So not only does it tend to do well in the bear market and the recovery year in terms of dominance, but we also typically see that it leads the next bull market as well. And so the lesson here is for me anyways, right, is and I've said this for a long time, right? Crypto portfolios, in my opinion, not financial advice, but at this stage should mostly be Bitcoin heavy. That's what I am. It's been that way for a long time. I have not really been interested in the altcoin market. Now, because I have not been interested in the altcoin market, I've missed out on some pretty great rallies in the altcoin market. But I also know that given my own experience navigating bear market rallies in the altcoin market and seeing them go up and then seeing them lose all their valuation a few months later, on and on and on, I was just like, I don't really care about that. It's more so just let me just preserve the value of my portfolio as best I can. And the way that I do that is just making my crypto portfolio Bitcoin heavy and then having cash on the sidelines throughout the bear market year and the recovery year to make sure that I have ample resources to take advantage of any opportunities that come my way. So the point is, no matter what way Bitcoin goes, right? Whether Bitcoin goes sideways, whether it goes down, whether it goes up, whatever, the dominance of Bitcoin, the argument, right, is that it should go up either way. And if you are interested in the altcoin market, you still would theoretically reserve the right, if the thesis comes true, you would still reserve the right to get those altcoins later on, but by using your Bitcoin to get them, right? Rather than, because again, if let's say you do this, let's say you put $100 into an altcoin, but then Bitcoin went up 2x, and the altcoin went up 25%. If you had just put it into Bitcoin, the argument, of course, is that, well, you could have gotten more of that altcoin later on by just converting your Bitcoin to that altcoin rather than just putting in the US dollars. Because again, we've seen before that Bitcoin typically leads the bull market. So that's where you would want to theoretically be concentrated whenever that occurs. Okay, so that is the argument. As of now, we can see that the Bitcoin dominance has now made it above 45%, including stablecoins, which I think is a pretty big milestone. If you look at the bull market support band, you can see that we actually came down to the 21-week EMA, held it as support. I mentioned, on the premium side, actually, when it was down here, I said, I think this is a bear trap, and I think we're actually going to see the dominance blast off here in the short term. And now that it's above 45%, it can move quickly, right? I mean, these things can move quick. When it breaks out like this, you can see it move up very, very quickly. It can move to 46%, 47%, so on and so forth. And ideally, that's ultimately the direction that I'd like to see it go. So I do think we're watching, we've watched for a long time the dominance build out a pretty large base down here, okay? And I really think the main direction for it to go, no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, is up. And then we will talk about a couple different potential directions of Bitcoin USD here in a few minutes. But that is the argument that I think is worthwhile to make, is that the dominance should go up. Now, it's going up, I think, not only from like a cyclical point of view, and this is what it normally does at this phase of the cycle. I mean, even in 2019, when we had more or less a Bitcoin only rally, the dominance went up, right? So we saw that before. We can see it again. And if you want to take the other side of it and say that the rally is over, there's a good chance that if Bitcoin comes back down, the dominance should keep going higher. Now, beyond cyclically, fundamental reasons why I would argue that the dominance should continue higher is because Bitcoin is not prone to the same regulation risk that the altcoin market is. A lot of a lot of regulators in the United States recently have been going after cryptocurrency. We've seen a lot of banks close down. We've seen just sort of speculation as to which ones are securities and which ones are not. And this type of fear, I think, is going to keep a lot of big fish out of the altcoin market, just because you don't really know. But Bitcoin's different in that regard, and I don't think it. I think that it's a bit more capable of attracting larger investors than the altcoin market would be. So because again you have the regulation risk, because you have just from like a cyclical point of view, it would make sense to me that the dominance should continue to go up, not only from the cyclical point of view, but also just from a fundamental perspective as well. And so I think that's what we're continuing to see. And I think it will continue to be what we see for quite some time. Interestingly, this move here started at the same level that it started at back in 2018, right? If you want to argue that, starting here in September and then this one started in April, so just essentially almost half a year apart, Bitcoin dominance rallied all the way up from this level to around 62%. Now, I'm honestly not under the illusion that the dominance is an oscillator. I'm not saying that it is. I do think it's more likely than not going to, come back up and then eventually kind of roll back over rather than take out these highs. I don't think taking out those highs is a likely scenario. Of course, I reserve the right to change my mind on that, but I don't think that taking out those highs is a likely scenario. Just like taking out these highs was not a likely scenario over here, And so as this rally continues by the dominance, I think it'll fall short of going to 73, 74%, right? Like I don't think it's going to go back above 70%. I don't even know that it'll make it much above 60%, if I had to guess. I mean, maybe around 60% or so would be the area to look for. But that is at least what I'm thinking when it comes to the dominance of Bitcoin, including the stablecoin market. If you look at 6-month candles, you will notice that we have actually completely taken out anywhere we were at for the last half of 2022. So that's a big change. I mean, a big move by the dominance of Bitcoin to continue to rally on up and to put in these new local highs that we haven't really seen since almost a year ago or so. Now, if we flip this over to the monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, you can see that we're looking at large candle bodies, overshadows, and no undershadows or very small ones if they're there, right? I mean, a fairly strong uptrend, I would argue, by the dominance of Bitcoin. To me, this just looks like one massive double bottom, right? You have 1, 2, kind of like mimicking the reverse of sort of the peak in 2021 on the USD pair, right? You had 2 tops. Now we're having, I think, a double bottom on the dominance of Bitcoin, and I think we will continue to go much higher. One interesting thing though is if you were to look at this rally over here, uh, Bitcoin USD was actually going up during only half of the rally. So right here you can see that Bitcoin USD was going up until the dominance got to around, let's see, around 48%. Okay, so once the dominance was at around 48%, Bitcoin USD's rally was spent, but the dominance continued to go up. And if you want to compare it to this rally, you can see that the dominance continued to go up even after the rally faded, right? So like even after the rally was fading, the dominance continued to go higher for at least a little bit. And then that was sort of the sweet spot, I think, for altcoin accumulation after you got back into that bleed and the dominance was at very high levels, and we were no longer really seeing the devaluation of altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs, and not, at least not to the same extent that we were once upon a time. And so I think the argument is, well, no one really knows exactly what Bitcoin USD is going to do. If you do know, then congratulations, because I can assure you, I mean, I've not predicted. I would have no idea who could possibly predict this type of move and nail each one. But with that said, the whole point of this is you don't have to worry, right? If your crypto portfolio is Bitcoin heavy, then you're likely just going to see those altcoins continue to devalue on their Bitcoin pairs. All right. And let's go through a few examples that we can just stay up to date on what these altcoins have been doing. So to start off, we'll take a look at ADA Bitcoin. This is one that I feel like I can pick on because it's one I've talked about on my channel a few times, and I don't just want to pick on altcoins that I'm not as that I've never really been into. But if you take a look at ADA Bitcoin, you can see that it's actually putting in new lows for this cycle, and could easily be breaking down. The counterpoint to all this is, sometimes I get a bit of my head on myself. Maybe you could argue that sort of at the lower part of this channel, and it could bounce back up. But I do think the trend is pretty clear, and that it's ultimately going to very, very likely resolve to the downside. And if it pops back up in the short term, so be it. But again, I do think it will resolve to the downside and continue much lower. Another one you could take a look at is DOT Bitcoin. What do you notice, right? It's just continuing to slowly go down, riding that bull market support band or bear market resistance band, if you will. Every time these altcoins rally against Bitcoin, everyone gets super excited and the dominance maybe sees a short-term pullback. But what happens, right? The altcoin gets rejected off the bear market resistance band on its Bitcoin pair and continues to go down. And if we continue and you take a look at Solana Bitcoin, this is another popular one that I think people enjoy talking about. And this was a pretty impressive rally. But when it occurred, I was like, look, guys, it's probably the same thing as this. Everyone's going to get super excited, but where is it going to find resistance more than likely? At the prior local low. So look at this. This low here became this resistance on the Solana Bitcoin pair. And then this low became this resistance. So my guess is that this low will ultimately be taken out and will become the future resistance. And perhaps it is somewhere in this level down here that some of these altcoins could start to finally regain some strength on their Bitcoin pairs. But I think the earliest that's going to occur is probably not until Q3 or something. And the reason I just want to continue to show this sort of stuff is because if you're not careful, while you might find the USD valuation of your altcoins can go up, the whole point is like a lot of them are still bleeding against Bitcoin over the macro scale, right? Take a look at Avalanche Bitcoin. Again, it's been putting in higher lows. It's also been putting in lower highs, and it's coming back down here to around 6,500 satoshis. I'm not really sure if it's going to bounce or not, but this is another one that I would ultimately expect to resolve to the downside and try to consolidate at some lower levels before ultimately turning back up. It's likely going to take a massive parabolic rally by Bitcoin to make a lot of these altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs much more interesting. Now, I'm not trying to minimize their ability to rally every once in a while, especially on their USD pairs, but the point is that they're losing value to Bitcoin on almost a monthly basis. Okay. And if you're not careful and you're just 100% altcoins, you can slowly see the Bitcoin valuation of your portfolio slowly bleed and bleed. And so that's why I do think it's important to recognize, what does the dominance of Bitcoin tell us? It continues to tell us that it's likely going to be in an uptrend for a while, and the altcoin market is likely going to continue to deteriorate on its Bitcoin pair. The other main one that I suppose we should talk about is the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. And, this is, admittedly, it has held up much longer than I thought it would. There's no guarantee that it's ever going to break down like I think it will. But imagine if it did. Imagine what the dominance would do, right? Like that's what really could send the dominance to levels that I think a lot of people aren't even considering. 45% is great, right? But it makes me wonder, what 50% would be like. And I do think we're going to get there, but I think the way that you get there is the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation would need to break down, okay? Because, watching the altcoin market break down against Bitcoin is one thing, but if Ethereum were to break down against Bitcoin, that could send the dominance soaring extremely quickly. Because think about it like this. If we go back and we pull up the dominance of Bitcoin and we overlay the Ethereum dominance, so ETH dominance, you can see that it was in this rally over here where the Ethereum dominance went down, but the Ethereum dominance hasn't been going down. Now, a lot of people that watch this channel, I think, are very pro ETH, and you probably assume that I'm not. I actually am. I'm still of the conviction that Bitcoin should outperform for a while, and so I think that's the most likely scenario. But if that move comes to pass, then I will flip back to thinking that Ethereum can outperform Bitcoin. But until that occurs, I still remain skeptical. And I do think that Bitcoin will continue to outperform Ethereum for several months to come. If you look, in fact, at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, and we take a close look at, look at the yearly candles of the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, one of the things you might notice, and I probably need to switch this back to normal candles. One of the things you might notice is we actually had, two greens and then two reds and then two greens. This is probably going to be another red, but note that this secondary red closed below the wick of this one, okay? And it actually closed about 36% below it. If we were to go 36%, or that to the wick, it didn't close 36% below it. It closed 28% below it, but it actually went about 35% below the wick from that prior year. If it were to go 35% below at this time, it would put it at about 0.03 or so. Even if it were to only go 25% below it, it would put it about 0.0365. So I still think that's a likely outcome. And I think that Ethereum would start to show more strength against Bitcoin in a more sustained way, probably starting, late this year, early 2024 is my guess, right? It's my guess. But anyways, that's where we stand with the dominance of Bitcoin, including the stablecoin market. And I think the thing that we need to talk about before we get to excluding stablecoins is, well, what does this mean for the US dollar? Where's Bitcoin going to go in its US dollar pair? Well, I mean, the cold hard truth is in the short term, I have no idea, right? I mean, I said before, I think this is just a random walk more or less. And I mean, this has been a pretty nice pump here off of this macro downtrend line. If Bitcoin takes out these highs, then I think you'll continue to see the dominance soar. One of the things that we've mentioned is, and maybe before I get to that, let's just review the dominance, including stablecoins and excluding. So including, it's 45%, but excluding stablecoins, it's actually at 50%. If you were to take a moving average, like a 30-day moving average, you can see it's just been slowly building out a base. If you want to take a 50-day estimate, you can see it's slowly building out a base. So I think this is resolving in the way that we've discussed for a long time. It's just taking a long time to do it. If you go take a look at the altcoin season index indicator, you'll note that we are back in Bitcoin season. This is over 90 days. If you look at it over 30 days, it's even more obvious. If you look at it over 60 days, it's getting into Bitcoin season soon. Going back to 90 days and taking a 30-day SMA, you can see it is rolling back over. So it does in fact look like we are heading back to Bitcoin season over hopefully longer periods of time, and spending some time in those levels to continue to see the deterioration of the altcoin market on their Bitcoin pairs. So that's something to consider. And when it comes to Bitcoin USD, I've said many times that I think this year is just going to get everyone wrecked. Now, admittedly, so far it's primarily the bears that are getting wrecked. Okay, but I do think you're going to see both sides get wrecked this year. Arguably, both sides are already getting wrecked. I mean, if you look at this type of a chart, if you have any active traders in here that are taking all these plays, I mean, this is a very hard market to predict. To put in a high, a low, a higher high, a lower low, maybe a higher high. We don't know yet, but a very difficult market to predict indeed. And again, the whole point is well, the dominant should ultimately go up either way. But if we were to try to get an idea of what is theoretically possible, and I've talked about this many times before, and this goes back to the year-to-date ROI. So my general expectation for this year is that it's going to, the bounds are likely going to be somewhere between the average of 2015 and the average and 2019. This is my guess. Again, I could be wrong. There's certainly things I get wrong, right? But this would be my best guess, is that 2023 is going to be bound by sort of the limits here. And the limits here are essentially 25% down from the yearly open to about a 2x up from the yearly open. Now, the yearly open, I believe, is around 16.5. So from 16.5, we're going to go find 16,500. 25% down would put the price of Bitcoin at around $12,000. But again, 2x up would, of course, put it at around $31,000 or so. So I'm not saying that the Bitcoin has to hit either of these extremes. In fact, it probably won't. We probably won't exactly see each of these extremes. But my guess is that this year, the price will remain in this channel, okay? It could already be done. I mean, the rally could be done already. But I think that we're not going to be I don't think we're going to see new all-time highs this year on Bitcoin USD. Normally what happens after a bear market year is you just get a recovery year where you can rally on up, but then you can also just come right back down. That was 2019. And then 2015 was sort of two rallies up and then back down, right? One rally and then another rally, about 3 months, a couple months up, a couple months down, some consolidation, and then a couple more months up, a couple more months down, and so on and so forth. So I think you're likely going to look at it something like that. I think the narrative that will eventually bring it back down to sort of revisit some of these lower levels will be the recession a theoretical recession narrative, of course. But with the recent changes in the expectations for the terminal rate, which we'll talk about maybe tomorrow a little bit more, it really does call into question the sort of the pace at which this business cycle is going. Because as up until recently, the expectation for the Fed funds rate was for it to go much higher, but now the expectation is that we're only going to get to 5 or 5.25, and then we're going to see rate cuts. And there's a lot of people saying that we're not even going to see another rate hike. So we'll see. But you can see that expectations for the terminal rate has changed a lot. Note that typically cutting, when you get rate cuts, it hasn't usually been a great thing for risk assets. Okay, not historically. Okay, now I want to provide a little bit of commentary, at least, on a couple different ways to look at this market. All right. Now, I don't really typically go into this much detail in one video, but I am kind of enjoying just making longer videos and then letting them sit for a day and a half or 2 days rather than make like several smaller videos. Let me know if you guys like that or if you just prefer the shorter videos. I'm open to suggestion there. But a couple of different ways to look at this market. So I want to first look at a bearish way, and then I want to look at a bullish way. All right, so I'm going to try to cover both bases and kind of tell you, show you what I'm looking at. One of them is the dollar. Okay, now the dollar so the dollar is more of the bullish perspective. So if you take a look at the at DXY, it's actually fallen quite a bit here. Okay, Now, with the dollar falling, typically risk assets rally, and we've seen Bitcoin rally quite a bit over the last couple of days. Now, I think the thing to keep in mind is that if it follows something like this, right, where so the dollar was coming down and then it sort of had like one little pump and then finally it plunged, right? And during this pump, like so during that September of 2020, Bitcoin retested its bull market support band and then had one last rally into the end of the year. That's one idea. And so if the dollar does go to a new low, then of course it would likely support a continued rally by Bitcoin for a while. Be that as it may, if that does come to pass, it means that we could be getting closer to the end of this, and then it would start going back up. Though I did have I did have Lynn Auden on the channel not too long ago, and she's of the opinion that the dollar will likely trade above these lows but below these highs. And so if that's the case, then there might not be as much juice left in the Bitcoin rally. But of course, that interview was carried out before the recent events that we saw with some of those banks. The other way to look at this is to take a look at the stablecoin supply ratio oscillator. So if you look at the stablecoin supply ratio oscillator, you'll note that with at least the data we have here, there's two other times that look somewhat similar to what we're experiencing right now, 2021 and 2019. Go figure, right? In both cases, you can see that Bitcoin, as it, once we got up to these levels up here and it started to just sort of lag around a little bit, Bitcoin was able to push just a bit higher, but then it continued to fade. Now, the stablecoin supply ratio, if you're not familiar with it, it's just equal to Bitcoin's market cap divided by the stablecoin market cap. So it can be shown or interpreted as the ratio of Bitcoin supply and stablecoin supply denoted in Bitcoin. So you can quantify the extent of the buying power, essentially, of the stablecoin market with respect to the Bitcoin market cap. Now, recently, obviously this has been going back up a lot, but historically, when it's down here, right, when it's at low levels, is a more opportunistic time. When it's at higher levels, we know that the price can continue to go up, right? So if we look at the last time it had hit sort of this level, you can kind of see that Bitcoin was able to continue going higher for a little bit longer. And then here we went into this distribution phase, but eventually that was ultimately faded back down. So what does it mean now? Well, I mean, it means that it could continue to rally for another month or two, but that it likely will fade later on with it, going into the latter half of the year, which is my general expectation. I mean, I've said many times that, there's not really a lot of evidence of a recession just yet. There are some cracks starting to show, I suppose, with the banking sector, but until we see the unemployment rate start to go up, until we see sort of stuff like that, then as long as we're seeing GDP continue to put in new highs, it's hard to really make the case for a recession right now. But you could maybe make the case in the second half of the year, or you could maybe make the case in early 2024 if it doesn't transpire during the second half of the year. So my best guess is that, whatever happens with Bitcoin in the short term, whether it stays below its recent highs or whether it goes up to new levels, whether it's 28K or whatever, eventually I do think later this year, early next year, it will get faded, and then we will get one last scare before going into the next Bitcoin halving and the next sort of round of quantitative easing and so on and so forth. So the point of all this, of course, is to say that, and the argument, as always, right, is whether the dominant or whether the price goes up or whether the price goes down, the dominant should go up. So by having a crypto heavy or a Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio, the idea is that it will help preserve your satoshi value a lot better, of course, than if you were just loaded up on the altcoin market. Now, I know there's a lot of people that trade altcoins and would swear by that, but this is my strategy. I found it has worked quite well for me, and my crypto portfolio continues to be heavy Bitcoin, and in general, I see the continued deterioration of the altcoin market, ADA Bitcoin in a macro downtrend, Bitcoin in a macro downtrend, and so on and so forth. Some of them have held up better, obviously, but Solana Bitcoin downtrend. AVAX Bitcoin downtrend. Matic is one that's held up a little bit better, but it's also more or less just been range bound as well. And again, there's always a few that hold up better than others. So that's where we currently stand. My expectation is that the dominance will ultimately continue much higher, and that by having a Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio, it will preserve the Satoshi value of your portfolio much better than being too exposed in the altcoin market. I'm not trying to take away anything from brief altcoin rallies. We know we can get those, but Bitcoin leads. And remember that Bitcoin would likely lead us out into a new sustained bull market. And if you're in the camp that we're already at that phase, right? If you're in the camp that phase is already here, then again, I mean, the dominance should go higher, right? This is the argument, anyways. The last thing I wanted to take a look at was the blue chip dominance. Okay, so this is the Bitcoin dominance plus the Ethereum dominance. This is something I've been watching for a long time because I was hoping to see this break out, and it looks like it's finally broken out, and I think it's going to continue its trend higher. You can see the Bitcoin dominance and Ethereum dominance continued to go much higher back over here. This move that took us until about mid 2018 took us to about 73% on the blue chip dominance. So right now it's just below 65%. If 73% is in the cards, then that's a long way up for the blue chip dominance. It means that not only should Bitcoin outperform, but also theoretically Ethereum should outperform a lot of the altcoin market. So a lot of things to consider when it comes not only to Bitcoin, but Ethereum as well. I'm more interested in Bitcoin at this phase of the cycle because I think it will outperform not only the altcoin market, but also Ethereum. But I imagine I will shift my opinion on that probably in about 6 months or so is likely when I would start to think the altcoin market could be nearing the end of its devaluation on their Bitcoin pairs. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Remember, we do have the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.